Well, this is a gift to me, Pastor Peter. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time, and there's some dads that have been a gift from a distance that I get to see just their writing, what they preach, what they teach. But then there's other dads that you get to journey both the behind the scenes,
right,
and the
the family enough to see how they cook it.
And then for the long distance, so 15 and a half years. I mean, we met 15 and a half years
Isn't
ago.
that
I walked
crazy?
into Substance Church holding the hand of my girlfriend, Michelle.
You were a college student?
I mean, I didn't know anything. And
gosh.
It's fun. I've got the picture right here. So if you're watching on YouTube, you can see the picture, and I'll clip to it. But this is a picture I'll hand over to you.
Oh my gosh, look at that hair.
Just to describe for our listeners who are just doing audio. So this is a picture of you holding our oldest daughter. So my oldest was just like 2 months old at this point.
That's
and
crazy.
you and Carolyn were holding her, and the journey of young, single, married, and then into parenthood.
Wow.
It's been 15 years that we've, like I said, known each other, in the chapters of then leadership, serving on staff with you.
Yep.
But what I wanted to thank you for is courageous leaps. When you display courage and you risk it all, and you and Carolyn did that with young kids. You risked it all. You planted Substance Church to reach young adults here in the Twin Cities. That courage inspires other people to take courage. And to take courageous leaps as well. And so that is my story, as we just a couple months ago have launched dadAWESOME and Fathers for the Fatherless, and take that courageous leap full time. Your courage has inspired both in my own fatherhood, but also as a leader to take a courageous leap. So I just want to thank you for your investment in me as a man, a husband, a father, a leader. I'm just so grateful. And I want to take a moment to invite you and to just say welcome to a chance to share on the dadAWESOME podcast. So welcome to the show.
Absolutely. Wow. Well, Jeff, we love you. We love you and Michelle and all of your cute kids. And I mean, it's just been fun to even be a part of your life. I mean, I think about officiating your wedding. To this day, I say it was probably one of the most magical weddings I've ever officiated. And I've done a
lot of weddings.
You know what I'm saying? And then just like your kids, oh my gosh, it's just been fun to actually do life with you and actually log some years. The fact that we actually can log decades, and the fact that not only do you know my family, but I know your extended family.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? Like there's something beautiful about that.
And just long term, I mean, that the principle of staying in the same place over a long period of time, different chapters come and go, but for us, it's been planted here at Substance Church for almost since the beginning. We missed the first year, almost since the beginning.
Well, you're an honorary.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I love it. Well, just to help, though, our listeners get to know you that don't know the Haas family, can you give just a snapshot of your family, age of kids, how long you've been married, and then a snapshot of leadership in the church here?
Yeah, well, coming up in a week or two, I'm going on my 25th wedding anniversary.
Congrats.
I don't feel that old. I
25.
still feel like I'm 30, but 25th wedding anniversary. And then my oldest daughter is turning 20, my middle daughter is turning 18, and my son is turning 15. So he's going to be getting his driver's permit, which really freaks me out.
Look out.
I know. Everybody be watching your backs.
Yeah.
No, but so we pastored in Wisconsin for almost 10 years, planted when we had 2 little girls. And Jeff Zog walked in at the end of, it was really, I think it was our first year anniversary or sometime.
Right about,
a little after that. And you came in with a bunch of Bethel College students, and our church was only running 102, and until Jeff Zog, and then all of a sudden, boom, we grew to 200, and it's almost funny to even think of our church that small, but it's just been quite a journey planting and having kids while planting.
Right.
Talk about a juggling act.
Serious. And I know, one story that's kind of fun is you were doing premarital counseling with my wife and I, and we had to take a month break because your son was born right at that kind of it was like 2 months before our wedding. He was born, and then he came with this newborn baby was with on our premarital counseling, the last kind of meeting or two. And so my chapter of marriage is the exact same length as Eden's life. So anyways, it's just so many fun points on the journey. But speaking of the journey, I think for us and for me personally, knowing what does it feel like to launch a child? So what does it feel like to actually drop off at college? Many of us, it's the college point is when our child's going to not be at home, sleeping somewhere else, learning under someone, has to make all those decisions themselves. So you you experienced that moment a little over a year ago with your oldest daughter.
Yeah.
I'd love for you to take us there. What were you feeling in that moment? And then what was like, man, I wish I could go back and tell myself this, because at this moment, it's becoming crystal clear what my priorities should have been, or glad that they were. So talk about that moment for a bit.
Well, keep in mind, we were dropping my daughter off on the other side of the United States.
Right.
We've, from Minnesota to Florida, and so she doesn't really know anybody, and yet, she said her entire life she's going places, right? So this was, it was 10 times more emotional than I ever would have. It was like an eruption of emotion, me watching her. Honestly, it was one of the hardest moments, just watching her walk away onto the campus by herself to go to this party. Honestly, it just kind of, you want to protect your kids, you know what I'm saying? And there's some moments where you can't. And in some ways, I think that's actually one of the harder things as a parent, is there's certain things you can't protect your kids from. You need to just watch them go through it. It's no different than when your kids are young and you want to just take away their pain, and yet you can't. You know what I'm saying? It's the same feeling of watching your kids get stitches, or you look them in the eye. The way that I could describe it is, one of my daughters got stitches on their forehead when they were they were a year and a half old. And when you have to look them in the eye and they're getting these stitches and they're like, "Dad, why are you not taking away this pain?" And you can't even communicate. You're just like, "I'm sorry. I have, this is for your own good." And the same thing kind of happened to me watching Elijah. Her name is Elijah, like Elijah without the E. And she was walking onto campus, and she was great. Actually, for her, it wasn't half as emotional. But for me, it was like, oh, my Lord, okay, I have to trust you. And that's really, in some ways, if you don't have God when you're parenting, I don't know how you can be a functional parent, honestly, Jeff. Looking back, though, I felt good, though, because I had logged so many hours with her.
Yep.
And, she called us every single night, that first week, and just gave us the report, not even for her benefit, but for our benefit, because she knew that we were emotional about it. But, if you pour into them, they're going to, now we're reciprocating. She calls us to counsel us.
Yep.
How are you doing, Dad?
Well, and I know, you've talked about logging thousands of conversations, and I've just heard you talk about that since, actually that conversation with you 3 years ago was one of the genesis moments for this ministry, dadAWESOME, was you're just talking about, you got to log, you got to be intentional with these conversations. Talk about that principle of intentionality, and why, when you say specific conversations, why does it matter?
Well, okay, so maybe I'm just an analytical dude, and I like to think this way, but parenting is a series of 2,000 conversations. And I say 2,000, I'm making up that number, but it's actually not just 2,000 conversations, it's 2,000 conversations, demonstrations, and impartations. Okay, it all rhymes, but it's think about it this way, okay? You have 50 conversations on dating. The first 5 are just, at a certain level. The next 5 are more advanced level. Then the next 5 are them pushing back, saying, "I'm not sure I agree with you." And then it's the next 5. It's explaining why, in light of their information, this is, in light of the disaster they just saw in their friend. But it's not just conversations, it's demonstrations. This is me forgiving someone, and they actually see me, or me being generous to someone, giving a car away, or helping a friend in need, or tithing. It's demonstrations, me apologizing to them. And then it's impartations. It's these moments of, oh, you failed your driver's test a second time. How failure is never final. It's getting back up. It's me encouraging you in this, making a moment of it. It's me making a moment of their first date, making a moment of their first dance, their first, these them getting filled with the Holy Spirit, them getting their first Bible, making a moment, impartations. And seizing those. And if you think about those 2,000 conversations, impartations, demonstrations, what's weird about them is you can log a lot of those when they're young, but intellectually, the conversations, they all kind of happen in a very, very, very tiny window. Okay, so if you think about it like this, okay, you have 18 summers with your kids, for the most part, and then you the 70% of the time you spend with their kids is going to be before they're 18, if you think about it, okay? Because actually, once they get their driver's licenses and they get their first part-time job, most of your kids are kind of like unavailable at about 16. Okay, so your window of discipleship, if I could say it this way, is like, I would say 12 to 16. Okay, so if you think about it, you have about, this is what catches parents off guard, is because their kids are intellectually maybe not even capable of having deep conversations until, say, 11. If your girls might have them by 11, but guys are pretty much like, Dad, I don't care, I'm into video games, until like 12. And so you have these 4 years to log an amazing amount of conversations without sounding like you're ranting, which is, I think what actually happens is I used to think, hey, if you're emotionally intelligent, you're going to be able to mentor your kids and disciple them well. But actually, most socially sharp parents, they'll have rebellious kids simply because they didn't log enough hours in the golden window, if I could say it that way. And that golden window is that 11 to 16. That's right. And so in some ways, I think most parents who kind of their biggest regrets, and if I could go back to your first question, what's the biggest regret?
Sure.
It's, I didn't take enough time to log enough hours. I just didn't log enough hours. Of the 2,000 conversations, by the time my kids were 16, I only logged 400. And I may have given them the first couple conversations, but I didn't give them the chance to push back and follow up and wrestle with some of those. This is why we tithe. This is why we date the way we date. This is why conversations about sexuality, conversations about technology, conversations about credit cards, conversations about car maintenance, conversations about friends,
Super helpful. And the practicality of you talking generosity and dating and finance, like so many of these areas, can you go even a little further practical as far as what are other categories when you think of the golden window, other categories to help the dad listening that's like, man, where do I start? Couple thousand conversations and demonstrations and impartations. Can you go a little further as far as the practical areas or topics of those intentional?
You can't log all of the conversations, but what you can do is you can give them principles like this, Psalm 92, planted in the house of the Lord, you will flourish. I've always taught my kids, always, always, always have 4 to 7 friends and a ministry in the church. And that doesn't mean my kids haven't whined about it. My kids, I don't care how good your church is, they're going to whine about it. They're going to whine about going to school. They're going to whine about brushing their teeth. There's certain disciplines we just do. If the church is open, we go. It is not a question of do we want to and are we available to do it. And so and the reason for that is because I won't always be there to mentor my kids, but I want my kids to be in a church around mentors and around divine Christian friends. And because your friends are always going to be rotating, your mentors are always going to be shifting. My availability, I mean, if you think about the reason why the golden window is 16 is because the moment they're around the house less, my leverage decreases. The moment they move out of the house, you when you don't have the roof over their head, you lose your leverage a little bit. And so then you have to change your parenting tactic. Parenting adult kids is totally different than when they're little, you can just say, because I said so. And then when they're teenagers, you have to be like, well, this is why. You have to parent into the why all the time. And then after a while, you lose all your financial leverage. It changes. You know what I'm saying? And so
Well, and I'm thinking about your son, actually, because he served, I got to lead our kids ministry for almost 4 years, and your son showed up and served. And I know that it was right at that point of the golden window of him being told, no, this is what we do because I'm a Haas.
Yep.
And then there's but helping him understand the why and the bigger picture. So he served as a volunteer in our kids ministry, which is so fun for me to see him coming in with his apron on, ready to serve these little toddlers. But talk about that point of it both being this is just what we do. Church is open. We're there. We serve. And then the infusing some of the side of the why and really understanding and getting passionate about serving.
Well, at the end of the day, everybody will whine about a discipline, but they need it. They need it. And my son whined about serving in the kids ministry. We actually forced him at first. Yep. And this is not an option. Mm-hmm. And then eventually, once he comes enough, he gets friends. And those friends are maybe strange friendships. It might be a friendship with an adult volunteer who's serving. And then he'll come with stories. And then after a while, he'll find out he's needed. And then that one parent affirms him, hey, my kid loves coming to the kids ministry because you serve. And, when we started forcing him, it was 6th, 7th grade, he didn't understand why we were forcing him. But after a while, he got addicted to it. What was so weird about COVID is he got out of the habit. And we had to go through another wine cycle when we started kind of forcing him to get back into. We attend a service, we serve a service. Attend one, serve one. And then he got addicted again. And like even my kids would even whine about going to youth group, and then they'd go and then they'd love it. And, we'd have to kind of force them to get into the rhythm of 3-4 weeks straight of whining, and then they love it. And then they're into a 6-month season. It's kind of like this. I think parents, they get thrown when their kids whine because they think it should just kind of always work. And there's a certain tension. Your kids will always roll their eyes when it's time to wash the dishes. But you get better at imparting those disciplines. But once they're addicted to church, and once they have those 4 to 7 friends and a ministry, they have roots. Planted in the house of the Lord, they will flourish. They have roots. And then all of a sudden, it's a lot of the best parenting moments aren't your kids learning the lesson themselves. It's them having friends, and then they'll tell you about their friends, and then you're hearing about their friends having a dating disaster, and then you're like, well, what would you do, Eden? How would you, and then you're actually covertly discipling them through their friends' highs and lows.
I love it. I love it. Your story about forcing until he experienced the benefits. The interesting thing is that we as dads, and then if you go back to demonstration, some of us dads listening right now are not serving in the local church, are not serving others. So we've lost hope on the demonstration side at that point. We can only force on the other side. And actually, in my research for this conversation, it was fun. It was an excuse to go back to a Father's Day message that you preached in 2014. So 6 years ago. Now, I'm sure you don't remember it because you're preaching way too many messages, but you talked about God being our Father and being fathered by God. It's interesting. I don't have anyone that is forcing me into a discipline that's good for me. No one's forcing me that I'm going to see the benefit in the future. We actually have to submit our disciplines and our agendas and our calendars to our Heavenly Father, not as a boss who's saying do this, but a loving Father who wants to father us. And that, I believe, is where that cycle of us seeing the benefits and the upside and the goodness of God in being planted in the house of God, like you're talking about. But I'd love for you to expand on the concept of dads being able to demonstrate by receiving love from the Father so that our kids can see, dad's in this as well and believes that these things of 4 to 7 friends and a ministry. Anyway, can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. Well, at the end of the day, you can't export what you haven't first imported. And I think for a lot of guys, they get so caught, they cheat to their careers because you can count it more. My climbing the corporate ladder and my salary, it's easier to measure. And as Andy Stanley puts it, you cheat to the things you can count. And parenting is just a lot harder to count because you have to measure your parenting more in 3-4 year windows. And is the trend good? Is my kid doing good in school? Are they loving the Lord? Or it's harder to measure. And so we always tend to cheat towards our jobs. And I think that in some ways I always encourage dads too, the problem with that is the older you get, the less you think about your vocational success, and the more you think about your kids and your friends. Like, you talk to old people, all they want to talk about is their kids, or their biggest problems in life are, my kids aren't following the Lord, or those types of things, or their marriages are struggling. And so my whole thing is begin with the end in mind. It's your kids that matter at the end. And so in your relationship with the Lord, it's slowing your life down enough to say, okay, these are going to be my priorities. I will, at the end of the day, nobody ever gets to the end of their life and thinks, man, I wish I would have spent more time at the office.
Right.
They're like, man, I wish I would have logged a few more hours with my kids, or on my marriage. And so for a lot of parents to stop and say, hey, experiencing God's life, we love because he first loved us. For guys to make sure that relationship with the Lord is first, there's these priorities of you gotta have your relationship with God first, and then your marriage second, then your kids third, then your career fourth. And when we get those, to use the juggling metaphor, if all of these things in our lives were a different ball in the juggling metaphor, your marriage is a glass ball, your kids are a glass ball. Your career is a rubber ball. If you drop it, it'll bounce back. Okay, you can survive a bad financial year, but when you can only drop your marriage so many times before it becomes fractured or chipped, and it permanently deforms it. And so I'm always like, hey, let your career bounce back. Of all my regrets in life, there's been years where I neglected the church, maybe a little too much. And, we lost staff members that maybe we couldn't have, or we didn't have to lose, or things like that. But you know what? Those are regrets I can live with. Yeah. What I can't live with is, I was an absentee dad for that 1 year. Yeah. And that bugs me to this day. Or I wasn't on it in the golden window, and then I got behind with the conversation with my kid about this, and then they ended up incurring a few burns, so to speak, from the world. You don't want to have those types of regrets.
Right. Super helpful. To go back around to that Father's Day message from 2014, to ask it a little different angle, you mentioned in that message this idea of we potentially make the mistake of thinking of God as a master and us as a servant. So master-servant dynamic. And I think a lot of us dads drift into a fathering like that we are the master, our kids are the servant, they do what we say, versus the other side of that, of God being a loving Heavenly Father we can't earn any love from.
Yes.
And then we could pass that along, demonstrate that to our kids, pass that along to our kids, impart that to our kids. Can you talk about the difference of approach to God and how we might even accidentally have that approach, the wrong approach for our kids?
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. I think a lot of times we view God through our earthly relationships. And if our fathers were disengaged, we tend to see God as disengaged. And yet, he's madly in love with us. He wants to spend time with us. And when we don't have that kind of relationship with God, it naturally reflects. It's almost like I think it's important to really reflect on the types of relationships that we have. And, our parents did the best they could. Let's just be honest. Let's not rail against our parents. But at the end of the day, when I got adopted, part of the reason why I'm always advocating for church is because everybody needs multiple mentors. Yeah. And there was just certain people that could fill, everybody has fathering wounds. And everybody needs, and there are certain people who taught me what the love of the Father feels like. Yep. And really mentored me, that adopted me. And after, even just yesterday, one of my mentors called my daughter up just to coach her and encourage her.
Amazing.
And just random, and I kept thinking, if we knew that God was that interested in us on a daily basis, it would change the way we relate to our own kids. And so ultimately, experiencing God's love, even just through daily devotions, is going to be so critical. Otherwise, we're not even, we're not asking God for help. It's kind of like my son just called me up yesterday and wanted me just to pray for him.
Wow.
Hey, I'm feeling a lot of emotion on this. Would you just pray for me, reset me? And I prayed for him.
Love that.
And I thought the fact that he even knew to call me was related to the fact that he's in those moments where I would even just, whenever I needed God, I actually would go in and I would ask him, hey, would you pray with me for this? We'd exchange prayer requests. Even when he was in 5th grade, which his prayers were not deep at all. But he knew that, hey, Dad asked me to pray for his fill in the blank.
Yeah.
And he knew this is what we do. We go to the Heavenly Father every night. So I'd always make sure that we'd have a good bedtime ritual.
Yeah.
Every night, the hour before their bedtimes, I would spend it with their kids, flopping on their bed for each 15 minutes.
So great.
And just demonstrate prayer. It sounds so silly, but that little ritual was how I wanted to model how to relate to God. And I think they caught it. But it was also a pattern of, hey, my dad is always available to me before bed.
Yep.
And so kind of making that time sacred.
Yep.
In those busy seasons, they got to see my relationship with my father.
Yep.
And then they also got to see that my earthly father is equally available to have those conversations. Hey, Dad, I had this problem at school.
Yep.
And then we diagnose it.
I love that, and I love that it's right before sleep. That was one of the last moments. Is that moment with them? Talk about whether daily, weekly, monthly, any other just reoccurring. Hey, I made time. I carved in time for this because it mattered.
Yeah, I for our family, there were certain things that were sacred. Family dinners were sacred. We always wanted to make sure that we spent time together at dinner. And then we'd all clean up together, and then we'd all hang out. And if that was like video game time with Dad,
Sure.
For a half hour, and then it was this long bedtime ritual, be it me reading a Bible story with my son, or me flopping on my daughter's bed watching baby seal videos on YouTube,
Yes.
or whatever it is, so the evenings were always devoted to my kids. I have to say that I did kind of anything that impedes upon time with my kids. So we had to get really picky about, because sports after school and all that kind of stuff, after school stuff is chaos. So we had to say, okay, dinner and bedtime is sacred when they're little. And that gets increasingly complex when they get older. So, if you don't, again, it's that golden window. Anything. Most parents are always thinking about their kids in terms of two metrics. Are my kids getting good grades, and am I exposing them to as many opportunities as possible? That's how the world thinks.
Yep.
We realized exposing our kids to as many opportunities is not our definition. It is logging as many hours as we possibly can in that golden window is the definition of good parenting. And if they have to not be exposed to as many opportunities on purpose, and my kids don't regret it. It's not like my kids sit and think, well, I didn't get as many piano and dance lessons and as many sports opportunities. They never sit around and talk about that. They talk about how many hours we logged doing a common hobby together is what they talk about.